Science. Today we're going to be talking about economics and how it relates to environmental science. Um, you know, People rely on resources all the time, all around us, and we use those resources to make products or provide services that help us to earn a living. And the environment and economics in that sense are very closely related to each other. In fact, the word economic and the word ecology come from the same Greek root, which is oikos, which means household. So in its broadest sense, the human household is Earth. So what is economics? That's the question we're going to ask today. But before we get into that, just wanted to touch base on the central case study, Cleaning the Tides of San Diego and Tijuana. So basically, this case study is going to ask the big question of how can we best balance our own interests and with the health of the environment. So how can we do the things we want to do, have the things we want to have, and still take care of the environment? So the Tijuana River crosses over into Mexico from the U.S. and empties out into the Pacific Ocean. This is down near San Diego, and so it comes out of Mexico and into California, dumps out into the Pacific Ocean, and it's very heavily polluted. And the pollution isn't just from Mexican farms and homes and all the sewage treatment plants and all that, but it also comes from U.S.-owned factories. So in 1990, the U.S. and Mexico agreed to build a wastewater treatment plant in order to try to remedy the pollution that's being dumped into the Pacific Ocean, but they haven't yet completed the construction of that. So why would the pollution of the Tijuana River be a particularly difficult problem to solve? That's a question to think about as you read through that. And also you want to think about how the case study illustrates all the connections between environment, the economy, and government policy. So be sure to read through that case study when you get a moment. But we're going to move on to economics. So what is economics? Most of us, when we hear the word economics, we think of money. But it also has a lot to do with human behavior and how we interact with nature. So economics, then, is really a study of how resources can be converted into goods and services, and then how these goods and services are distributed and used. So goods, let's define a couple terms here. Goods are the manufactured materials and the products that we consumers, as individuals and as businesses, like to buy. Services, of course, are the work that someone or a company does in order to provide a service for others as a form of business. Examples of this would be like home repairs, carpet cleaning, daycare. These are services that we purchase as consumers as well, but they don't actually have a product, they have a work. Somebody does work for you. My wife's a personal chef. That's a service that she provides. I'm a teacher. That's a service that I provide. Now, if I made birdhouses and sold those, that would be a product. So, just so we know the difference, I think you guys probably already do. So let's move on. So there are three different types of economies. And let's stay on the screen for a minute. There are three different types of economies that I want to mention. One is a centrally planned economy, and that's when a government decides what to make, how to make it, and who gets to do it. This would be your socialist and your communist governments, and that's the type of economy that they would run. Then there's the free market economy, where individuals decide what is made and how to make it and how much is made. And then there's the mixed economy, so centrally planned economy, free market economy, and mixed economy. Mixed economy is obviously probably just what it sounds. Yes, it's where both government and individuals play a role in making the decisions, and pretty much all modern economies are mixed. So the degree of government's involvement differs from nation to nation, and so for us, like in the U.S., our economy tends to lean more towards the free market. It's a mixed economy, but skews a little bit to the free market. So economics are very closely tied to the decisions that we have to make every day about what we need and what we want, right? And then there are economists, there's people who study economics, and they spend a lot of time examining all the factors that influence those decisions that we make as buyers and that sellers make in order to satisfy the buyers. The first part of economics that we need to be clear on is the law of supply and demand, which you're probably familiar with, or have at least heard it before, the law of supply and demand. So on the screen here we have a chart that shows the demand curve versus the supply curve. And so this shows you basically products and services availability versus the demand for those products and services. Typically, markets tend to move towards equilibrium, where there's pretty much an equal amount of demand and an equal amount of supply. When there's too much supply and too little demand, cost will usually go down. When there's too much supply, and I think I just said that, when there's a lot of demand and little supply, costs can go way up. If a lot of people want something and there's very little of it, it can cost a lot more to acquire it, which is good for businesses, but not so good for individuals. So we typically tend to find a balance, and what tends to happen is, as the price goes up, the demand drops, because fewer people are able to pay that higher price. So the demand drops, and that means the supply is going to catch up with the demand. We're going to hit more of an equilibrium. The price is probably going to come down. So it kind of tries to find that fine balance between supply, demand, and price. But price influences. It's both influenced by and influences demand. So price is influenced by supply and demand, and can also be controlled a bit by demand. A lot of decision makers, particularly businesses, will do something called a cost-benefit analysis. This is where they'll compare what they can sacrifice and gain by taking specific actions. I'll give you an example. If a company considers buying or developing a new product, or maybe a city considers improving a transportation system, all the costs and the benefits have to be considered. And then if the costs are going to outweigh the benefits, then the idea usually either gets revised or they abandon it. But if the benefits outweigh the cost, then the action is usually pursued. For a company, the benefit would be income, would be profit. So if the profit's going to outweigh the cost of implementing, then they'll go forward and create the product or develop the service. So the cost-benefit analysis, it can get very, very complicated, and so therefore it becomes controversial because not all costs and benefits are easily defined or identified. So we're going to get a little more into that as we move along. So economics and the environment. Basically, this is the idea that economies depend on the environment for goods and services. The environment definitely provides us with a number of different goods and services. Some of the goods that the environment provides would be sunlight, fresh water, timber, fossil fuels are listed right there on the screen for you. Services would be, as it says, nutrient cycling and purification of air and water. Purification of air and water. Water particularly happens in the soil. Soil filters out all the impurities. Air also gets purified through respiration and transpiration of plants and people, actually, as well. We're part of the process of purifying the air, although we're using the oxygen and returning the carbon dioxide, not using that. But as part of the environment, we actually are a part of that process of purifying the air. But the environment can do these things on their own. Now, of course, you're going to think, okay, well, we've got wastewater treatment plants and all that, and we're purifying water as well. Why is that? Well, it's because we use more water than the environment can recycle for us or can purify for us. So we have to kind of get involved, and since we're using more of it, we have to do some of the work of purifying it so it can be reused again. Economic activity can actually have a negative effect on the environment, and this can also negatively affect economies. When any type of economic activity depletes any of the natural resources or produces too much pollution in the process, then ecological systems are harmed by that. And so this will in turn it's kind of a cycle. It ends up having a negative effect on the economies. So, for example, if you take a vacation destination, what happens at that vacation destination when the local sewage treatment facility can't keep up with the waste that's being generated? Well, what happens is the wastes pollute all the water, and then the swimming areas get closed. When that happens, all the tourists stop coming to the beach, and less money is coming in, and we end up with local businesses suffering as a result. So it can be a real nasty, vicious cycle. So the interactions between economies and the environment, we really need to be aware of what's going on there. Sometimes these interactions aren't considered in the cost-benefit analysis that we discussed a moment ago. In fact, things like beautiful views, fresh air, clean water, those don't really have any value assigned to them. But I just mentioned beautiful views. Going out for a drive, and you drive up some steep mountainside, and there's a lookout point where you can park your car and go look out over the valley, and it's just a beautiful thing. That's considered a service, an environmental service. And of course, we don't ascribe any monetary value to that. So a lot of times when cost-benefit analyses are being done especially by businesses or any for-profit agency, those are the things that they don't really consider because, it's not part of their, there's no value assigned to it. Although that's not necessarily true when it comes to construction, like building homes. A lot of times homes are built in places where they have a beautiful view, and that's part of the selling point and can increase the value of the home. So it's not always ignored, but most of the time it is. If I'm going to build a better bicycle wheel, I don't really care about views. It's not part of what I'm going to consider, although I should consider it based on where I need to get my resources from to build that wheel. So that's what we're talking about here. So there are a few assumptions that we've held about the economy for a long time, and these assumptions about economics are actually having negative impacts on the environment. One of those assumptions is that cost and benefits only affect the buyers and sellers. It's not true. It also affects the environment. And we also have always thought that short-term costs and benefits should be emphasized. So the quick gain, We've also assumed that resources are basically unlimited, which we know that's not necessarily true, especially when it comes to fossil fuels. And we've also assumed that economic growth is continual. For the past couple years, we've not really been growing economically in this country, so we know that economic growth is not always continual. But internal costs and benefits and how they affect buyers and sellers, you know, we've always assumed that it's just a direct involvement of the buyers and sellers in the transaction that are affected, and so we call them internal costs and benefits. But things like beach closures due to the Tijuana River pollution in the case study, these lead to economic losses for restaurants and hotels that didn't contribute in any way to the pollution. So the costs of the pollution aren't being figured into the cost-benefit analysis of the new factories that are opening in Tijuana, because their owners aren't going to be paying for those costs. So these types of factors that involve other parties other than just the buyer and seller are known as the external costs and benefits. So we have the internal costs and benefits and the external costs and benefits. Regarding the short-term assumptions we've always made, often we give more weight to the short term than we do to the long term, because a lot of the environmental problems actually unfold very slowly. So initially we don't even realize there's a problem. So less attention are going to be given to the effects of resource depletion and pollution on future generations, because we don't see it right away. It takes a long time, perhaps years, perhaps decades. And then the idea that resources are unlimited. Obviously, a lot of times economists don't consider that resources can run out. People will assume that any resource can be substituted with something else. It's true that some resources there are substitutes for. For example, machines now do work that was previously done by animals, particularly in farming. But other resources like fossil fuels, we can't replace those. And then we have economic growth, and the assumption that it was continued. That's an assumption that's required to keep employment high and maintain social order. But the rate of economic growth in recent decades has been just exponential up until the last couple of years. So we have more and more goods that are being produced and sold, and some argue that because of Earth's resources being limited, this nonstop economic growth is not sustainable. Sustainable is a word you're going to hear a lot in this course. But others will argue that technology is just going to continue to overcome the obstacles to economic growth, and that the growth is, in fact, sustainable. So, the new trend in economics is the recognition that suppliers of goods and services need to consider all of these different resources and how we can conserve them and therefore reduce the harm that we're causing to the environment. It kind of asks the question, can economic growth continue indefinitely with ever-advancing technology, or do we need a more balanced system? So there's an emerging field of economics called ecological economics, and this applies the principles of Earth's systems to economics. These systems would include all the complex relationships between living and non-living things, as we've discussed when we've compared ecology to environmental science. Remember that question? You should have answered that one by now if you're this far along in the course. But generally, we want to have as close to a perfect balance of inputs and outputs in these relationships. So ecological economists, people who study economies and consider ecology, would argue that history suggests that civilizations don't overcome their resource limitations. So many ecological economists would actually advocate that economies that don't grow or shrink, they're really actually stable and sustainable, like Earth's systems. So, no growth, no shrinking of the economies, it just kind of stays the same. There's another field, though, called environmental economics, and it agrees that economies are unsustainable if the resource use isn't made more efficient. Okay, but these economists would argue that economies can become sustainable if environmental challenges are addressed. So some of these challenges include assigning market values and what's the word I was looking for? Some of the challenges include assigning market values to the ecosystem services that we've talked about and addressing some of the market failures. So environmental economics applies the principles of Earth systems to the study of economies, and it would argue that economies can't be sustained unless we address those environmental issues. So market values have to be assigned to the ecosystem services in order to consider them in our feasibility studies, in our market studies, cost-benefit analysis, all of those things. We would need to definitely have an assigned market value for different ecosystem services, like a beautiful view of a valley like we see here in this picture. And then the last major point here on environmental economics is that it suggests that market failure will occur unless those market values reflect environmental costs and benefits. So, in other words, we have to take into account environmental costs and benefits and assign market values to them that are considerate of those environmental costs and benefits. Otherwise, our markets are going to fail. The idea is that we're eventually going to run out of the resources we need to drive our economies, and therefore our economy is going to falter when it runs out of the resources. So, when it comes to assigning market values, stay on the screen for a minute. When it comes to assigning market values, ecosystem services are said to have non-market values. So, when markets don't reflect the full costs and benefits of the actions of manufacturing products, creating services, performing services, those markets are said to fail. So market failure occurs whenever markets don't consider the environment's positive effects on the economy, such as ecosystem services, or when they don't reflect any negative effects of economic activity on the environment, or on people for that matter, like those external costs we were talking about earlier. So I'll give you an example. If you have a smokestack that emits chemicals that's harmful to trees and pollutes water sources, even hundreds of miles downriver or downwind or whatever, traditionally the company that's emitting the chemicals haven't been held responsible for those lost resources or the cost of cleaning up, the effects they've had on human health, and those sorts of things, which are all enormous costs. Instead, some other group, which is usually us, taxpayers, your parents, we have to pay for those, at least some of those costs related to what that company is doing. So the company is not being held responsible. So to try to counteract those external costs that the company causing the cost isn't responsible for, governments have introduced in cases some policies that give companies some incentives, some economic, financial incentives to conserve resources and reduce their pollution. Or they've even passed regulations and so forth that would penalize them with different taxes or fines or whatever if they don't reduce their pollution. So the government is in the business of trying to regulate and hold accountable those companies that are causing pollution, causing all of these extra external costs, to try to reduce those external costs in order to try to prevent market failure. One of the other things that happens in terms of economies is we get all these changing consumer values. And these changing values can drive corporations to pursue sustainability. For example, as all the grocery stores moved towards using plastic bags, everybody was using plastic bags, even though you could choose plastic or paper. But then it became apparent that the plastic bags were causing a lot of pollution, and the plastics don't break down quickly. It takes years and years and years for a plastic bag to disintegrate and be recycled naturally. So people started moving away from using the plastic bags and using paper bags. But there's also a cost associated with that, such as the harvesting of trees to make the paper and all that. So less pollution, but more resource use. But the plastic bag manufacturers didn't rely on trying to convince people that all the trees being cut down was bad, because what happened is the paper industry started planting trees to basically solve that problem. So the plastic bag manufacturers actually had to pursue a different process to make their bags, different material, different resources. So they made their bags out of consumer post-waste material. So it's basically recycled plastic. They're making plastic bags out of recycled plastic, and there's recycling programs now. And so using plastic isn't as bad of a thing as it used to be, unless you always throw your bags away. But if you recycle your bags, if you don't recycle your bags and you want to, contact your local government, your local township or municipality government, and find out where you can recycle your plastic bags at. Another part of this consumer changing of values and the corporate responses are labeling. We have a lot of different labels on different items. Appliances now have Energy Star ratings. So it might be Energy Star efficient, and that label identifies products that are approved as being energy efficient by the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, but there are different levels of ratings. So the highest rating is obviously the most energy efficient for that type of appliance. You've also got like USDA organic. A lot of people are buying organic produce now. In fact, as it says there in the Did You Know box, organic farming is actually one of the fastest growing segments in U.S. agriculture. And we've seen about a 15% growth in the amount of land that's devoted to growing organically since 2002. Well, actually each year since 2002. So that's pretty significant. Another, speaking of organic farming, another shift that I'm starting to think is happening. I haven't done any research on this, so I don't know for sure. But there's a big push right now, a lot of talk about buying local, particularly produce, buying from local farmers and things like that. And there's a lot of good things that come from buying locally from local farmers in terms of helping the economy and the environment. So it's a good thing to buy local. And a lot of local farms are now getting organic certified by the USDA. So you buy in local and organic, and it's often cheaper than buying non-organics in a grocery store. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can be more expensive. But if you start finding local farmers markets, the more popular those farmers markets are, that means the demand is up, and so the supply is there, and the price can come down. So it all kind of works together. So having these kinds of labels on products and services is called eco-labeling. And they basically tell us consumers which brands are made with processes that are less harmful to the environment. Okay, and as we as consumers demand more sustainable products and services, more of these industries and businesses and corporations are finding ways that they can make money and improve their public image at the same time by supplying the market with these types of organic and energy efficient products. So we're increasing energy efficiency, we're reducing the use of toxic substances, we're increasing our use of recycled materials, and we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we're doing a lot of really good things to protect and sustain the environment so that it can provide all the services that we enjoy today for generations to come. So that's the end of this lesson. There'll be a few questions to answer. If you have any questions about the material covered, certainly give me a call or shoot me an instant message. I'd be happy to get back to you and work with you on that. Okay?